Now let's talk about how ZBrush allows us to paint textures. So the way that we're going to paint color onto our models here in ZBrush is going to be a little bit different than what you've done in probably other applications. Let's go to Lightbox and let's just bring in something that we can paint on. So I'm just going to bring in this demo head, close out of Lightbox, draw it out onto the canvas, and we'll go to edit mode, just as if we were going to sculpt. And remember that the sculpting and the painting is all sort of connected based on what we have selected here. So let's concentrate just on the painting aspect of it. So I'm going to turn off Z add. So we're not going to be doing any sculpting with all of those off. All we're going to be doing is affecting the color of our model. So let's also change the material so that we can see things a little bit better. It makes more sense. So I'm just going to click on this basic material. And I also am going to go ahead and subdivide the model, because an important aspect of texture painting in ZBrush is the fact that it's tied directly to the resolution, the polygon resolution of the model. Okay, so when we paint our model, it's called poly painting. So we're painting the polygons or the points. Think of it kind of like a vertex color, where it's not dependent on UVs, it's dependent on actually adding color to the individual components. So let's go ahead and smooth that out. I'm just going to turn off symmetry just to make things a little bit easier. And so what I'll usually do is go ahead and fill the whole object with a particular color. So in this case, white, it kind of gives it a blank color. Because right now I can change color and the object will take on whatever color I've selected. But if I go to color, fill with RGB 100% intensity, now I can change colors. And the subtool, which is this head that we have selected, isn't changing. You can see the eyes still are, but the head's not. So we can select a color, and our main color's here, then we have a secondary color there. Still using, let's just use the standard brush, but now we're only affecting the RGB, so the color. I can come in here and stroke across, and you can see it's adding that color across the face, but it's not raising the geometry, it's not lowering the geometry. If I now come back and take our resolution down, you can see that the texture or the color blurs out. And if we get to a low level, you can see that's the limit of the resolution. So I can still come in here and kind of color those points or those polys, but it's very low resolution. Okay. If I now go back up, you can see the color that I painted at that lower level isn't really translating perfectly to the higher level, but if I paint at this level, it's fine. So we can paint just using a regular dot stroke in this case. Okay, we can change colors here by just clicking on these colors. We can come in and let's say create another color over here. We'll paint this orange next to it. If we use smooth, and you can see that some of these things change when I use the modifier key. This is the shift key. And if I turn this off, the Z add off, when I smooth this, it'll only smooth the RGB. So this allows me to kind of blur these colors together without moving any of the polygons or smoothing out any of the sculpted detail. Okay. We can also mask off areas if we don't want those to be affected by color. We'll talk about masks a little bit later. And clear that out. Leave an opening there. We can also, we're painting orange here. If I hold down Alt, it'll switch between our main color and our secondary color, much like you would switch between Z add and Z sub if you were sculpting. Now, one of the cool things is that we can, if we want to, we can sculpt at the same time. So if we wanted to come in here and create sculpted detail that matched exactly with the painted detail, we could do that because we're doing it all at the same time. And we can also come in here and we can use the different strokes that we have. So if we wanted to just kind of break up the color of this, we could use like a color spray, and I would choose a color. And now when we come in here, it creates some variation in the color. You can see it's not just a complete green there. It actually creates variation based on the placement, the scale, the color, and the flow. So if we were to combine that with an alpha, you can see here or we can get something that is green, but it's a lot more realistic because it has lots of different tones inside of it. And if we go into color, we can change the variation of the color. So you can see here that we're getting a lot more variation in the color, so it's getting further away from green. You see some yellows and probably some reds in there, maybe some blues. And so, if you take this color back, you take it down to 0, then it's completely green. You can see that there. So that's a nice way to just break things up. And as we go through this process, that's one of the things that I like to do in creating a base, is just make sure that I break up the color a little bit, because even if something is green, it's going to look better in most cases if it's this kind of variation of green, right? Instead of one just solid color. And that can be achieved with the color stroke spray. Now we can also adjust the intensity. So if we have this really, really deep red color and we paint it on here, let me just go back and get a dot stroke. We paint it on here. Well, that's really intense, and it may be something where we don't actually want to get that intense, but we know we want that nice red. And so we can take the intensity of it down, and then we can get a very soft, and so you'd have to go over this a bunch of different times to get that red. Eventually you'll get there, but you have a lot more control over it versus one stroke and you're all the way there. And so that RGB intensity will help you dial that in. As we looked at before, this mRGB, this gives us the ability to paint not only the color but also the material, so keep that in mind. Now you can also sample color from the scene, and to do that you just click in our color picker and drag to the point where we want to sample, and you can see that main color changing based on where we've got our cursor. So I want to pick this red. I can go ahead and pick that red color, and again my RGB intensity is down, or I can just come in and draw this in. Now I want to pick this orange. I'll just click and drag to pick the orange and continue painting. Now if you're painting and you don't see anything, you can go into your subtool and you just want to make sure that this little paintbrush is turned on. If you turn this off, then you're not going to see your polypaint data, and you can see it just kind of takes on the effect of whatever color you have selected again. So you want to make sure that that colorize button is turned on. So if you're painting and you're having issues, you can check that. You can also check make sure your RGB is turned on and your intensity is at the correct amount. And then you're going to use your basic brushes. Now there are a lot of them. We're just using our standard brush. You can get some interesting effects with some different brushes, and your strokes to add color basically to those points or to those polygons. And remember, it's dependent on the resolution of your mesh. Now there are ways to convert those to UV-based textures, and we'll talk about that later on. So we touched on masking. Let's go ahead in the next lesson and take a deeper look at creating masks that will enable us to decide what parts of our model will be affected by what we're doing in ZBrush, whether it be painting or some other kind of deformation or sculpting detail. So we'll go ahead and do that next.